With me today, I've got Michaela McIntosh. She was the local Darling Downs president back in 2006, 2007 of Maternity Coalition. Then she moved up the ranks to national vice president in 2009 and 2010. Michaela now's one of the directors at My Midwife, so she's quite busy doing other stuff, and her consumer representation, although she's a very keen supporter, she just doesn't have time anymore. So welcome, Michaela.
Thank you.
So would you like to, I guess, to start off to tell us about what happened maybe to get you involved in consumer representation and how then that
Sure.
impacted on local issues?
Okay. I guess it all started with a pregnancy, really. I became pregnant with my first baby, and I knew that for me, I didn't want private obstetric care where we are locally because from what I had heard, the intervention rates were really high, and I was really keen to have an intervention-free birth for my first baby. I was pretty informed at that time, so I went to our public hospital and had my first interview with a midwife, and I was so excited to connect with the midwife because she was lovely, and I just felt like we had a rapport. And at the end of our appointment, I said, "Oh, so when do I get to see you again?" And she said, "Actually, I probably won't because I'm not rostered on when you're due to birth." And I walked away from that and I thought, that is so strange that I'm going to go into a hospital and have a baby for the first time with my husband and not knowing anyone who's with us. So I don't know where that came from. It was just something in me that it just didn't feel right to me. So that's when I went looking elsewhere, and I ended up finding a midwife in private practice. At that time, we're looking at sort of 11 years ago, there wasn't Medicare for midwives. So it was your midwife who worked out in the community and did home births, but also did supported births in the hospital. Didn't have visiting access to the hospital, but just provided that support role. So I went on to have a beautiful baby boy, and I guess during my pregnancy I didn't realise, but my midwife, I think, was actually assessing my abilities to be a consumer rep. So she was actually heavily involved at the time in the some of the reviews of maternity services. What was it called? Birthing, the Queensland. Anyway,
birthing or something, was it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. That's right. So that was all happening around that time, and because I was an obsessive pregnant woman who was, I was really keen to know everything, I think probably that sort of put me on the radar as someone who maybe had a bit, fairly strong social justice as well. Because once I'd had my baby, I had a beautiful experience. It was tough and hard, first time mum, but I was so thankful to have that support. I looked around me and I could see a lot of acquaintances and friends and looked at the experience that they had, and I couldn't imagine, going through that experience without the support of a midwife and without that person on the end of the phone. I had a bit of a situation, when I think I was about 2 weeks postpartum, and I had someone to call and someone to come to my house and, someone to cry with when I couldn't breastfeed. And so that's, I guess, where my passion came from, was with the birth of my first child. So my first meeting from that was actually with Bruce Teakle and Liz Wilkes, was with the Queensland Health Minister. So that was my very first meeting, baptism by fire. It was absolutely terrifying. I had no idea how I would handle it, but I did a bit of pre-meeting preparation with Bruce and Liz, and then just spoke from my heart, I guess, about, what I thought we needed locally. And at that time, we were trying to get continuity models up and running, not only locally but throughout the state. So that's where it all started. I then became fairly involved locally. Their dates are really blurry for me now because it is sort of over a period of 10 years that lots of this has occurred. But, there were 2 state elections in that time. So we had groups of women who would rally ministers and politicians. So we'd write letters, we'd go to the politicians' offices and have meetings, and go to the hospital executives and have meetings about what women wanted. And women wanted continuity and options, basically, and the support of a midwife. So the first election, we didn't get anything out of the election. It was the year that Anna Bligh actually got in that we managed to pull together, I don't know, it was probably 40 women and babies, and we found out where she was going to be in Toowoomba, and we had buses and we had blown up birth pools, and we all, rallied there. We had signs, and we basically rallied Anna Bligh for a birth centre. And what do you know? The next day, what did she announce? $1 million for the Toowoomba Birth Centre. So that was women who got our birth centre, and we were so proud. I've got all the newspaper clippings, which I'll share somehow. But it wasn't politicians. It wasn't the hospital exec. It was women, and saying what we wanted and believing what we wanted, that, got such an amazing facility for our local women. And, I think that just shows, what passion and people power can actually do. So then there was a few of us that were on the steering committees for that, and, the way that looked, and the feel of it, and the research around what the birthing environment does, and getting the right type of pool, and all those sorts of things. We then sort of, I guess, once we had that, we sort of thought, well, we've got good options now locally. Things quietened down here fairly well, so we ended up our group probably wasn't as passionate as what it was when we actually had something to kind of work for, I guess, and because things were so good, here in Toowoomba. I then went on to do some work with the national committee. So I sat on the board just as a member of the board, and then went on to be national vice president, as Alicia said. In that time, I was basically an expert consumer, which sort of seems like a funny word, but I represented women on the Senate. So I actually went down and spoke at Senate hearings about women nationally and what women nationally wanted. This is, all when the national maternity reforms were occurring. That's actually a huge highlight in my life, that I got the opportunity to do that, because I don't think many people do get the opportunity to, jump on a plane, fly to Canberra, go to Parliament House, and, represent something that you really believe in. It was also a really tough time because, I and others copped a lot of flack about what we spoke about. Obviously, there are people with, differing opinions, but we were representing a very large group of consumers and what they thought. But, with social media and all those things, there were people that really didn't agree with us. So No, that was challenging personally, but I also think, that can sometimes be, be part of it.
How did that opportunity come about, Michaela? Like, how did you end up being presented with that opportunity?
Alicia, I can't even remember. I'd have to go back through my archive letters and files, and like I said, it was just because where I was sitting in terms of the board. I guess I just recently had babies, so I kind of was, I wasn't 45 and representing a group of women. I was in my early 30s, potentially going on to have more babies. I guess I was kind of like just a typical consumer. I don't know, maybe it was, I was chosen because I, was passionate about the issue, and had a voice. But yeah, it was an amazing opportunity. After that, I ended up being on some of the national committees for setting up Medicare and the pharmaceutical benefits now that midwives now have. So we were getting flown to Canberra once or twice a month to be expert consumers on these boards of doctors and chemists and, various politicians, the head of the Nursing and Midwifery of Australia. And basically we were there to, again, impart our knowledge about what consumers wanted and how potentially, Medicare could work. So, again, there was a few of us doing it, but it gives, it gives something at a bureaucratic level, a realness about it. So instead of it just being about a group of people sitting around a table with no idea what they're talking about, having that consumer input, it actually makes it about what women want. And, admittedly, Medicare was set up and there are things about it that it's certainly not ideal. But, as we've gone along, there have been changes to item numbers which, suit women much better and the rebates that they get and, opportunities for midwives to be able to write scripts for certain things. We as a consumer group were part of all of that. So, I've seen what consumers can do, and I don't think that women actually realise, the power that they potentially have. And I think, I know that I wrote a letter or an article once for Midwifery News, and I talked about midwife magic, and it was about encouraging all midwives to get the women that they care for, active as consumers, because, women can have that voice. You can make improvements in a hospital or in a system. You can't do that from within a system. You're so, you are really tied up in employment contracts and what you can and can't say because of what policy says. And whereas a consumer, you can say what you like.
Where to from here, Michaela? Like, there's some big issues coming up this year, like the National Maternity Services Plan, the home birth exemption. What do you think we as consumers, or I guess what parting words do you have for us as consumers to really try and make change? Because we've heard from you that it does work.
You've got to band together. The more voices there are, the more powerful it is. So if you can go and see, your local politician and say, well, we represent a group of 500 women or, 300 women and men, it's a lot more powerful than, say, Joe and I come to you as a family. It's actually banding together, really honing in what the message that you want to impart. So you do all need to be speaking the same language and being smart about your message too. Excuse me. Thought I had that on silent. And reading about some of the what's happened historically in Australia. So, looking at rebirthing, the Queensland, that was out 11 or 12 years ago, looking at the National Maternity Plan, talking to other women, sharing your stories and, finding out what other women want and why they want that, is really powerful because, like I've said, people don't realise that, you can write letters, you can go and talk to people, you can visit your local politician, your federal politician, and the more people you tell, I guess, the more the more impact potentially that you will have.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Michaela, and imparting your words of wisdom and sharing your little piece of history in birth reform as well.
Thank you.